Good morning, I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. In today's update, today marks the 1 year since the death of George Floyd. A celebration of his life is taking place in Minneapolis today with musical performances and special guests. The governor also signed a proclamation calling for a moment of silence at 2 p.m. Eastern, lasting 9 minutes and 29 seconds, the length of time then police officer Derek Chauvin held his knee on George Floyd's neck. Coming up, our team is live at George Floyd Square. Meanwhile, President Biden is set to meet privately with Floyd's family today at the White House. Biden spoke with the family after Chauvin's conviction, promising to pass a police reform bill. He set a deadline for today, but so far Congress is at a stalemate. And George Floyd's death sparked protests around the world and jump-started a national conversation on police reform and race in America. Let's go to Alex Perche live in George Floyd Square in Minneapolis and Kenneth Moten in D.C. with more on the impact of Floyd's death. Thank you both for being here. Alex, I want to start with you. First of all, what's it like there at George Floyd Square right now?
Well, Diane, right now, I mean, they're getting ready for today's activities. You see the cars filing in behind me. There are people out. We've got vendors set up just in front of me here. They built a stage where there's going to be a concert later. And I will say that this is the most akin to those times where we were reporting here last June that I've seen since, certainly since this became an autonomous zone. It's certainly a larger camera presence out here. The media is back, which marks a change, right? Certainly the sense of a celebration of life today as this community prepares to honor the life and legacy of George Floyd.
And Kenneth, today the Floyd family is scheduled to meet with President Biden at the White House. What can we expect from that meeting, and what else does the family have scheduled today?
It's a busy day for George Floyd's family. Those loved ones, many of whom were inside that courtroom during that 3-week trial there in Minneapolis just a few weeks ago. And we know that after that guilty verdict of Derek Chauvin, it was President Biden who got on the phone with George Floyd's family in that hallway of the courthouse. And he said, "You're invited to the White House as soon as possible," and it's happening on the anniversary of George Floyd's killing. Who's going to be at the White House meeting with the president today is going to be George Floyd's brother, his sister, many of whom, again, we've seen in the public eye over the past year or so, speaking out on their brother's behalf, calling for action in the wake of his death, calling for there to be more to happen in the halls of Congress, calling for lawmakers to change when it comes to police reform and to make change. And so also meeting with the president will be Gianna Floyd. And remember her words, Diane, more than a year ago, or less than a year ago at this point, in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, she said, "My daddy changed the world." And right now we know that the family is really pushing, really trying to force Congress to change when it comes to police reform and to really have an impact when it comes to how policing happens in communities across this country. I said it's going to be a busy time here for George Floyd's family. Here, they're starting on Capitol Hill, meeting with Representative Karen Bass, also Senator Tim Scott, also Senator Cory Booker. These are all people who are working on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We hear at this point there is a framework, but as you mentioned, there's been a stalemate here in Congress. But we are hearing from Tim Scott this morning that there is light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to this act that they're trying to get passed through Congress.
And Kenneth, I want to ask you more about in a second, but Alex, I also want to go to something else the family just announced in terms of their push for change. They're talking about details now of the George Floyd Community Benevolence Fund. How are they hoping that this fund will help the Minneapolis community?
Well, Diane, you heard Kenneth talk about their push for change, and certainly that's happening at the federal level. But here's an opportunity that this family has targeted for them to make an impact specifically in this Minneapolis community, specifically this area of 38th in Chicago. And so they're starting with this benevolence fund. It's about $500,000 that's going to be doled out into grants for organizations and businesses that they believe have been negatively impacted by systemic racism here in this community. And so, again, this is part of a local, a hyper-local push that's also been echoed at other levels of the state and national that we've seen. But this is how they want to impact this particular community.
And then, Kenneth, as you mentioned, they're also looking to get this national police reform bill off the ground. The family's using their visit to Washington today to talk with a few lawmakers about that. So what is the status of the bill? Because originally the president wanted it passed by today. That doesn't look like it's happening. But what are the prospects of this bill? Will it get passed and make it to the president's desk? And is there a timeline for that?
At this point, as you mentioned, the deadline is come and gone. The deadline is today, and they won't meet that deadline. But we've been hearing lawmakers on both sides, those who are working on this, Karen Bass and Tim Scott, saying we need something substantive here. We can't rush this. The NAACP has also said the same, pretty much the same sentiments here. They want the right bill, and that even though President Biden called for this act to be, this deadline to be met today, that this act be approved on both sides, we know that it won't happen. And again, those who are working on it say this needs to be something that they take careful view of, something they take their time on. And so I think that's why we've seen this these comments come out in the past day, because they know the president's deadline. But Diane, when it comes to the pressure that President Biden is facing, he's facing pressure on both sides to get something done here, but especially by activists and members of his own party here. And so when they have that private meeting when he has that private meeting with George Floyd's family today, we're not expecting any cameras. We're not expecting any comments from the president, but we could hear from Ben Crump, the family attorney for George Floyd's family, to come outside of that White House and to say something later on about what happened during that private meeting. But back on that police reform, again, I mentioned earlier there's a framework. We understand Tim Scott has said that he can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then Scott, of course, I must point out the only black Republican in the Senate who's working on this, telling our congressional correspondent that there is a conscious effort to keep both sides at the same table, fighting for the same issues and making progress on those issues. So what are the issues, Diane? We understand there are a number of sticking points, but the biggest sticking point, qualified immunity. We understand that is what will, obviously when it comes to qualified immunity, it legally shields law enforcement from being personally liable for constitutional violations. Essentially, that allows people to sue police officers if their constitutional rights have been violated. Republicans want to keep qualified immunity intact. Democrats are pushing for higher police accountability measures here. And so we obviously on Capitol Hill have seen a number of pushes for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It passed in the House 1 month after his killing, but then it stalled in the Senate. And so when it comes to the democratically controlled House, people think, yes, it can get done there, but it's the Senate where the problems are. And we know it's a closely divided Republican-Democrat Senate right now. And so that's why you see Senator Tim Scott taking the lead on this, trying to find a bipartisan solution that will get enough Republicans on board in the Senate, and they would need about 10 of those Republicans, Diane.
All right. And Alex, we know that the day is full of events to both commemorate what happened and also celebrate George Floyd's life. So what are we expecting both there in Minneapolis and across the country?
Well, Diane, I think one real powerful moment is you mentioned certainly the Floyd family meeting privately with President Biden. Well, right around that time or immediately after, the governor here, Governor Walz, has signed a proclamation urging residents in Minnesota and Minneapolis to observe 9 minutes and 29 seconds of silence, representing the 9 minutes and 29 seconds that Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's neck. But hold on. Go, go, go. Down. Behind the engine block. Yeah. Behind the engine block.
All right, we're going to check in with Alex in a bit. It sounds like there may be some trouble there in Minneapolis. We're going to check in with them. Obviously, we hope that they are safe. And meanwhile, as lawmakers try to work on federal police reform, some cities like Minneapolis and Louisville have already implemented their own reforms, banning chokeholds and restricting no-knock warrants. Elected officials in other cities like Austin, Seattle, New York, and Portland also voted in 2020 to reallocate funds from police agencies to other services like housing and mental health assistance. Let's bring in civil rights lawyer, activist, and former president of the Minneapolis chapter of the NAACP, Nekima Levy-Armstrong, for a look at that change that has already happened and the change that activists are still fighting for. Nekima, how do you feel today knowing the tragedy that the day marks, but also the movement that it sparked?
It was a gift for many of us here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. May 25th will forever be etched in our minds as the day that we witnessed the lynching of a Black man here in our community in a place that's supposed to be progressive. On the flip side, what we have seen are folks roll up their sleeves and continue to persevere in demanding an end to police violence and police murder and demanding more accountability. We've also seen folks at George Floyd Square who live in that community within the vicinity of where George Floyd was killed take up the mantle of maintaining that intersection. And being able to hold that intersection for a year is unprecedented. We've had other occupations here outside of police stations and the governor's mansion following the deaths of Jamar Clark and Philando Castile. But this, and even after Daunte Wright was killed in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota on April 11th. But this is the longest period of time in which citizens have been able to hold on to what they're considering sacred space in honor of a person who has been killed by police. I think that that's remarkable.
And Nekima, the death of George Floyd prompted this nationwide reckoning on policing in America and a nationwide conversation. Protests broke out across the country with calls to defund the police, among others. So what do you think the long-term impact will be from what happened to George Floyd a year ago?
Well, we have seen significant change happen in other parts of the country. For example, New York City became the first jurisdiction to end qualified immunity. And then we saw the state of Maryland overturn their police bill of rights. We've seen places ban chokeholds and neck restraints and place significant restrictions on no-knock warrants. In Minnesota, we have seen some change, but not nearly enough. We've had a lot of watered-down bills that were passed last year during the legislative session. One of the most significant aspects of the bill that was passed actually included a focus on training for law enforcement surrounding interacting with folks who have underlying mental health issues or autism. And that particular bill was championed by the family of Kobe Heisler, a young Black man who was killed in Brooklyn Center within the last couple of years. And he had an underlying mental health issue. He was suicidal. And rather than police expressing empathy and de-escalating, they killed that young man. And his name was brought up after Daunte Wright was killed. What we have seen happen in Brooklyn Center, actually, is that the mayor has taken a great deal of initiative in terms of pushing for a significant change. One of the things that has happened is that there's been a shift now in terms of the conversation surrounding police being able to pull people over for routine traffic stop situations. Now, what they are pushing for in Brooklyn Center is for there to be a different professional entity that has the power to conduct traffic stops, likely an unarmed person, to try to limit the kinds of deadly encounters that we saw that happened to Daunte Wright as well as Philando Castile here in the state of Minnesota. That's a huge shift from business as usual. We think that other jurisdictions should adopt something similar in order to decrease the amount of not only racial profiling, but again, the deadliness that has happened with regard to some of the police traffic stops that have occurred in our state. We have a long way to go in terms of the other changes. So, for example, we proposed a bill to end qualified immunity, which did not gain any real traction here in our legislature. There's been some tinkering around the edges to our arbitration process. That process has been used to protect cops who have abused and killed people because arbitrators have a lot of power. They sometimes reopen the door to killer cops being hired back, at their previous department after they go through that process. And so that is a way of usurping the authority of the police chief when he or she decides that a police officer should be fired. And so they've only tinkered around the edges of that particular bill, but it is something we're continuing to push for a change to that particular system. We also want to see cases taken out of the hands of county prosecutors and placed into the hands of the attorney general or a special prosecutor. For those who tuned in to the trial prosecution team, as well as a high quality of expert witnesses, and that was because the local county attorney did not try that case. And so we are pushing for that in all the cases going forward, and we just got a victory in the Dante Wright case, where the case has been transferred from a local county attorney to the attorney general because of our demands as community members.
All right, civil rights lawyer and activist Nekima Levy-Armstrong. Nekima, thanks so much for being on with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. And I want to go back to Alex Prochet now at George Floyd Plaza. Alex, we were talking to you just a few minutes ago. You had to cut away. You had us all worried there. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened and more importantly, that you guys are okay?
Well, Diane, we are okay. The team got to safety, but I mean, you heard during that second question or third question that you're asking me, what sounded like initially maybe a cluster of fireworks, but you hear more and more of those pops, and you recognize it resembled gunfire. And so our security team evacuated us. We ducked behind a row of cars here in this church parking lot, and I can tell you that one of our security guards here mentioned that he'd seen gunfire maybe about a half block from our live location. But again, we'd mentioned how that this was the most akin to a return to life here that we saw last June when this was not an autonomous zone. But I will say that in talking with whether it be leaders at the church or leaders at some of the small businesses here, they have mentioned that, look, after the police and fire have been moved out of here, and after this became an autonomous zone, they've been dealing with issues like this. And when one of the challenges is when something happens, well, how do you get first responders in? How do you get medical aid in? And certainly, today, the anniversary, the 1 year after George Floyd's murder, with there being so much emphasis and concentration from the outside on George Floyd Square, people coming here wanting to take part and be a part of this energy, that's definitely something that's going to be of concern going forward. I told you, they're setting up for a concert here in this church parking lot, which is maybe a block and a half away from where we believe this gunfire erupted. So this is going to be something that's going to be of concern as the day progresses.
All right, something to keep an eye on. Alex, you and your team, stay safe, please. Glad you guys are okay. Welcome back. Here's another look at George Floyd Square in Minneapolis as we mark 1 year since George Floyd's death. It all started a global conversation around social injustice. TJ Holmes has a closer look at how one day in America has led to a national reckoning.
George Floyd lived life like most of us. He made good choices and some bad choices. He tried to be good to people, and on that day, he was mostly minding his own business on the day that he was killed. For this generation of Americans, this will be their Emmett Till moment. They will never forget the summer of 2020, the death of George Floyd.
We lived in the CUNY homes. It was the projects. It was the housing authority. Low income. It was a rough neighborhood. But to me, it's like, it's life.
At the heart of George's family was his mother, Miss Sissy.
He loved his mom, and his mom loved him too, and it was no secret. Everybody knew.
George and my mom, as you watched them, that Love and Happiness song with Al Green, they used to always play the music.
love and happiness.
He would literally pick her up and dance with her to that song. And my mom would just smile.
George was special, and he used to always be able to go places and people would fall in love with him just like that.
Douglas Elementary was listed as the 5th poorest school in Houston ISD. The boys and girls would write an essay on what I want to be when I grow up. When I grow up, I want to be a Supreme Court judge. When people say, Your Honor, he did rob the bank, I will say, be seated. He was a good student. He was a really quiet student until he got on the playground.
Floyd, he was good in football and basketball.
That's his territory. Nobody could mess with him on the court.
I remember they threw him a pass. He jumped up, extended his body all the way out, caught the ball, and he ballerina tapped in the back of the end zone.
Floyd's scholarship offer brought promise to them projects more than people even know.
George would be the first in his family to go to college, but he'd be back home within 2 years.
The police used to do sweeps in the CUNY homes. I thought they just did that in every community.
He would have trouble with the law. The most serious arrest, aggravated robbery. He pled guilty and served 4 years.
It goes from not just you losing your career and your future, it goes to now fighting to have freedom in any parts of your life.
I met Big Floyd at the time he was out of prison. We needed somebody who was a gatekeeper, who people respected and who could open doors. And Big Floyd was that person for us. What I saw with Big Floyd was redemption. He was using the fact that he was an OG in the neighborhood and was helping young men everywhere from 5 to 50 walk that path.
Our young generation is clearly lost, man. Clearly lost, man. Like one day it's gonna be you going up or you going down. You know what I'm saying?
But there were internal battles, and George made the decision to follow a well-known path to seek help. Locals call it going to Minneapolis.
He needed to get away from the environment. He needed that change. He wanted to just be a better man and a better father, you know. And he did it.
He used to call me Buttercup because I was his baby. And that we had all the happy memories together.
George attended a treatment program, worked security jobs, tried trucking school, but struggles would come.
Minneapolis is known for having some of the steepest disparities between black and white residents, really white and everybody else.
Minnesota nice. How ironic, right?
A year before he died, George faced a crushing loss.
His mother's death took a toll on him. He didn't know how to handle that.
This faithful man was devastated at the time. Like he was weakened.
And then came COVID. George, like so many Americans, would be laid off and contract the virus.
When he came to stop by, he just told me, you know, struggling a little bit. Yeah.
And violent deaths like those of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery were anguishing communities.
By the time we're on the cusp of Memorial Day, people just want relief from the psychological trauma of everything that they've been feeling.
On that holiday Monday, in Cup Foods, George's alleged use of a counterfeit bill, just $20, would ultimately lead to the police being called.
You know, he started hearing commotions. George is again on the ground pleading, you know, for his life.
Mr. Floyd's saying he can't breathe. The officer's saying he can breathe if he can talk. It's not true.
Once you just get him up,
He's not resisting arrest. You have him handcuffed. I kept voicing my concerns for George, you know, to the police. No response. I watched this man murder another man that looked like me for no reason.
That was a modern day lynching.
Then when I heard him say mama, like, that's when it got real with me.
And people all around the world seen that video, and they was like, where's the humanity? They was like, no, you're not gonna sweep this under the rug. We're gonna march.
All right, TJ Holmes, thanks for that. And you can see more on After Floyd, the year that shook the world, a Soul of a Nation special tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on ABC. And that does it for this ABC News Live update. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for joining us. And remember, ABC News Live is here for you all day with the latest news, context, and analysis. I'll see you back here at 3 p.m. Eastern with Terry Moran for The Breakdown. Stay safe.
After 25 years, Oprah Winfrey ended her groundbreaking show today alone on a stage with a message she says she wants everyone, all of her viewers, to take to heart.
What I know for sure from this experience with you is that we all are called. Everybody has a calling. And your real job in life is to figure out what that is and get about the business of doing it. And that is what I want for all of you. And hope that you will take from this show to live from the heart of yourself. You have to make a living, I understand that, but you also have to know what sparks the light in you so that you in your own way can illuminate the world. Start embracing the life that is calling you and use your life to serve the world.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.